This is the IMI 6 by Abasi Concepts, and today I'm going to explain why it's one of the best guitars I've ever played. And no, this isn't sponsored. I bought this with my own money, which we're going to discuss a bit later. But in order to truly understand what makes the IMI great, we first have to take a brief moment to acknowledge its grandfather and inspiration, the Stratocaster. The Stratocaster was one of the first mass-produced electric instruments. It brought a ton of new innovations to the guitar world, and it has the most impressive resume of players in electric guitar history. In fact, Leo Fender's original design for the Stratocaster was so well thought out that today, nearly 70 years later, thousands of builders around the world still reproduce it with hardly any changes. It's a perfect guitar if there ever was one. Now, over the years, there's been many modern takes on the Stratocaster, but I believe Abasi Concepts is the first to perfect the perfect design. And that's a guitar innovation. Quick disclaimer, this video is about design, not about tone or my guitar playing, so we're mostly going to be discussing the features and their significance. Now, both the Strat and the IMI start with a great design at the headstock. The strings move in a mostly straight path from the nut to the tuners, which contributes to solid tuning stability overall. The Stratocaster, however, requires string retainers to ensure the proper break angle for the B and E strings. This certainly isn't bad, but whenever possible, it's a good idea to remove additional points of string friction. The IMI 6 achieves the proper break angle by pitching the headstock ever so slightly backward. It also has a synthetic nut, which reduces friction at another crucial point of string contact. And finally, we have locking tuners, which makes string changes faster. Another small touch here is the barrel-style tuning machines. They aren't better or worse than traditional tuners, but they do add a nice modern aesthetic to the IMI. And of course, everyone knows that it's always better to match the headstock with the body color, so that's also beautiful. Throughout the years, the Stratocaster has had many different wood combinations, but the very first was a simple maple neck and a maple fretboard. The IMI looks very similar, but actually uses roasted Corina and maple for the neck and fretboard respectively. Roasting the wood contributes to the darker color you see here, but more importantly, it removes any additional moisture from the neck, which should make it a bit more rigid and less susceptible to changes in temperature and climate. Now, the original Stratocaster and the vast majority of its later copies also utilize nickel frets that will eventually wear down and need a replacement. Many guitarists can easily go 5, 10 years or even longer before needing to change their frets, but there are examples where touring musicians, for example, require a fret job every couple of years. And at $200 to $350 per refret, this maintenance can easily add up over time. By contrast, the IMI is fitted with stainless steel frets that should last the instrument's entire lifetime. As a quick example, I have several guitars with stainless steel frets that were made in the mid-1990s, and they are still absolutely flawless, showing zero signs of fret wear nearly 30 years later. Of course, not all stainless steel is created equal, so it's important to find out which stainless steel frets are being used on your modern guitar. The original Fender Stratocaster had a very round 7.25-inch radius that was later changed to 9.5, and today there's many variations from 7.25 all the way up to 14 and 16. The IMI's radius is very flat at 20 inches, and I honestly believe having a flatter fretboard radius is an extremely underrated spec, and here's why. There is a fairly simple logic to having a radius on a fretboard. If you just hold your hand up in a neutral position, you'll see that your fingers and hand naturally curve. Thus, having a curve on a radius helps to mimic that natural position of the hand. And although it does make sense to curve the fretboard to mimic the curve of the hand, I don't really see, or better yet, I don't feel this playing out in the real world. So if you think about a classical guitar player, you'll know that their music is very complicated, very stretchy, and it takes a lot of accuracy to play classical music. Nonetheless, classical guitars usually have fret fretboards or very, very little radius. And the classical guitar and its repertoire has been around for far longer than the electric guitar. So I do believe if having a radius made things objectively easier, they probably would have added that somewhere between now and 300 years ago. And my other example is this guitar back here, the Sean Lane VGA signature model. That's one of the few guitars in the world that has a completely flat fretboard radius on an electric instrument. And I find that playing chords and scales and everything on that guitar is easier than any other guitar that I've ever played. And that includes the big cowboy chords down here in first position. So I will say this, fretboard radius is always going to be mostly a personal preference thing, but I do believe that 20 inches and flatter is actually extremely comfortable, even if you just play simple cowboy chord stuff in first position. And while we're on the topic of personal preferences, the IMI also has a very comfortable U-shaped neck. Now, I'm not someone who usually likes a very thin neck guitar, But I have to say that although this guitar is fairly thin, I find it to be the most comfortable thin neck guitar I ever played. And I think that's because of the added shoulders on this particular instrument. And the truss rod placement at the base of the neck is objectively better than the first Stratocaster design that required you remove the neck to adjust the truss rod. And I honestly also find the base of the neck placement better than the headstock placement. And this isn't a huge difference compared to at the headstock, but you can easily just grab an Allen wrench and get in here while you're still in playing position and make a quick adjustment. So I do like that a lot more. And finally, the ME6 has a beautiful set neck design in place of the traditional Stratocaster's bolt-on neck design. And here's the thing, I would never say that a set neck is objectively better than a bolt-on. In fact, there's many guitarists who specifically prefer a bolt-on neck because they believe it has a different type of pick attack, snap, and tone, and so on. Also, the original Stratocaster was designed for easy modification and repairs, and a bolt-on neck is definitely better for quick servicing and even just taking the neck off and mailing it in somewhere. With all of that being said, I still prefer the set neck of the ME. You can easily get to every single note, even up to the 24th fret, and it's extremely comfortable to do so, and there's also no bulky heel joint to get in contact with your hand. And if we're being honest, it just looks gorgeous. Now, when you see this guitar and compare it to a Stratocaster, perhaps the most obvious difference is going to be the shape of the body, so let's talk about that. Leo Fender created the Stratocaster body after getting feedback from players who did not enjoy the Telecaster shape. The acute angles on a Telecaster have a tendency to dig into your torso and your right arm, which some players find uncomfortable. Now, the Stratocaster rectified these issues with comfort cuts on the torso and the right arm, making it one of the most comfortable guitar bodies ever created. However, like most other electric guitars, the Stratocaster is at its most comfortable when played standing. And that's because when you stand with an electric guitar, it puts the neck at the proper angle of 45 degrees-ish. Most electric guitars, including the Stratocaster, fail to deliver the same level of comfort while seated. Now, if you're Joe Bonamassa or Kenny Wayne Shepherd, or really anyone who spends the vast majority of their time on tour standing and performing, then the seated ergonomics of an electric guitar may not be a big deal to you. But I know from talking to you all that most of you are similar to me, and we all spend a lot of time sitting and playing the guitar. And sitting in this standard way can limit your left hand mobility, and it can add strain to your right shoulder, your neck, and even your lower back over time. And yes, you can sit with the electric guitar in the classical position, and this does have some improvements compared to their prior position, but there's also other issues that arise here. We don't have time to talk about all of that today, but if you're really interested, you can check out my course linked below. The ergonomics and health section is worth the price of the course alone, but on top of that, the rest of the course is designed to help you teach yourself guitar. If you're interested, again, it's linked below. Anyway, you certainly don't need to run out and buy a fancy, expensive electric guitar just to improve the seated position, but that's pretty much exactly what I did. And that's because the ME improves the seated ergonomics tremendously. Now, it does borrow the forearm contour and the belly cut from the original Stratocaster, but on top of that, it adds a rear contour to the back, and I believe this makes all the difference. This allows the ME to rest nicely on your right leg, and you can adjust the neck to be at whatever angle you prefer. And on top of that, if you prefer the old school seated position, you can always put it over your right leg like that. And when you have the guitar in this position seated, when you go to stand up, it's the exact same position. So as you stand and sit in your normal guitar practice, which is what I recommend, nothing changes. And since you like guitars and guitar talk and guitar lessons, you're going to want to check out my free Guitarcraft newsletter, link below. The original ME6 did come with noiseless Fishman Fluence pickups, and they were amazing single coil sounding pickups. I, however, don't love the sound of single coils in general, so I'm still experimenting with different pickups that are going to be used for this guitar. Right now I have the Everything X installed by Seymour Duncan. If you want to hear more about these particular pickups, I have a dedicated review on them as well. The original Stratocaster Tremolo was a 6-screw design. It was one of the first vibrato bridges of its kind, and it had great tuning stability, all things considered. Many people still swear by it to this day. Fender later added a 2-point vibrato option, and 2-point vibratos are my favorite bridges by far, and I've tried just about every one on the market. The ME6 is fitted with a Goto 510, and this is basically the least expensive perfect 2-point vibrato system. Now, when you consider the price of this guitar, which we're going to get to very soon, I know a few of you are going to be wondering why it doesn't have a more fancy, high-end, expensive bridge. For example, the Sophia bridge, which is also awesome, by the way. Anyway, I'm happy that they went with the less expensive Goto 510, and here's why. The only thing you really need from a vibrato system is intonation, string height, global height, and arm tension. And if you can give me that and have it stay in tune and feel smooth, the bridge is essentially perfect. The Goto 510 does that. And as much as we hate to admit it, no matter how high-end the guitar is, things will eventually need to be replaced and repaired because nothing lasts forever. And when this bridge eventually needs to be replaced, you can go online, get an entirely new one for about $100, have it shipped to you overnight, and you can just drop it right into the guitar. And we know that Goto is a trusted company that's been around for a long time, so we shouldn't expect for the company to go away anytime soon. And on top of that, you can replace it with any other normal 2-point trem. So as much as I love all of the crazy small details of something like my Parker Fly bridge, we learned as a community that fancy proprietary parts can end up being a curse. As a quick example, the spring alone for the Parker Fly bridge, if you want to replace that, it's going to cost more than the entire Goto 510 bridge. And on top of that, they're no longer being mass produced. So yeah, I do have Parker Fly PTSD. Finally, we have the output jack, which is the same look as the traditional Strat, but it's placed on the back and top of the guitar. And this will ensure that you can sit in any position without the jack coming in contact with your body or causing any discomfort. By the way, if you like this deep dive, just take a second and give the video a like. I would really appreciate that. And so now we come to the price of the ME6. But first, a bit of historical context. Back in 1954, the Stratocaster with a case sold for $288.50, which equates to about $3,261.73 today. The Abasi IMI costs about $3,800, and those two prices actually aren't that far apart. Now, the ME6 is certainly not an inexpensive instrument, but it's comparable to other high-end guitars on the market today, and in my opinion is worth every penny. And every spec choice that I love about this guitar may not have been intentional. For example, the top of the guitar is finished in a matte, but the forearm bevel is finished in gloss. And the gloss forearm bevel gives me more traction and stops me from slipping off the forearm bevel, which has been a major issue for me with other modern guitars that have extreme forearm bevels. The 5-way switch is also slightly shorter and angled differently than other guitars, which means I don't hit it nearly as much as I thought I would, and I'm still able to quickly switch with my pinky while playing. Again, I don't know if all of these small design elements were intentional, but when you take the guitar as a whole, I believe this is the single greatest Strat money can buy, and a worthy evolution of the original Stratocaster design. By the way, I'm Andre Flood. My course and Patreon are linked below, and I'll talk to you soon.